That looks like a demon. I drew a demon.
That was exactly what I was thinking.
It's appropriate. Welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing, the podcast with pixels, where the anchors are out of this world and the points don't matter. I am Cassie Winter.
I am Alicia Marshall. If you're wondering who are we to be judging these pros and analyzing them, Cassie and I both have extensive experience in both solo and partner dancing. She has about 21 years. I have about 23. Starting this week, if you guys have any pro videos you want us to analyze in future episodes, put them in the comments of either the YouTube video or when we share it on our Facebook page. Either works, but yeah, if you have anything you want us to analyze, feel free to share. We would love to do some videos you guys want to see. We
and
them
any
every week.
particular topics too that you want us to talk about. So, for example, tonight's episode, Blast from the Past, is a requested topic, and our first video is Matt Auclair and Marianne Nunez. First place, US Open 2K is what it says on the cheesy video. So year 2000. But yep. I just love that it's 2K. It's just so good.
I had a hard time finding videos that were viewable. They are all very potato.
Yes. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. It should take you to when the dance starts in the video, about 40 seconds in. Go ahead and give it a watch. And when you get back, we will get to analyzing. And people are back.
Yes.
I have to do the thing that became a thing. To the screen share. So I went ahead and went past the intro where the video zooms in and there's this reflect animation over it, because that's just going to be disorienting to frame through. So some of the things that we just wanted to cover tonight as we're going through this dance and the next dance that we have queued up is kind of comparing and contrasting swing from the early 2000s to swing that we have today, and some of the things that we feel like we would benefit from bringing back that have kind of gotten lost over time.
So I think, I mean, in general, there are very obvious differences in this particular dance. And I think the most obvious is that it looks a lot more upright. And it is to some extent. I also want to mention that the style of their clothing is different, and that does make a difference in how things look. Like the pants, especially. I don't know. Actually, a good example of that, if you guys have watched Austin very much, he used to wear a lot of wider legged pants, and he's recently been more of the slim leg, and it looks very different, even though his technique and everything hasn't really changed. Right. So it does make a big difference in terms of what the dance is looking like.
That would actually be a different episode that'd be really fun to talk about, just West Coast Swing comp clothing through time.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
That just sounds fun. The first thing I want to talk about is this underarm turn where they actually trade places. So one still does underarm turns where you trade places in West Coast Swing today. It's a very useful tool, especially on a crowded dance floor, but also musically, it has a different effect than a left side pass where the follow goes from just one end of the slot to the other. But I feel like the technique behind it for leaders has kind of gotten lost over time, because it's really important to have that contra body. You can see how as he's stepping in front, his right hip is coming forward while his right shoulder is staying back. And then as he brings the hand across, he's making sure the hand is actually crossing the slot for Marianne. And granted, Marianne is phenomenally tiny I am so jealous of how small she is. I dream of being that small for dancing. As a 5'11" woman, I'm like, what is that like? So he doesn't have to cross the slot with the hand as much as someone would for me, for example, but it's still happening. There's still a third dimension to it, and that's really important for leading this kind of pattern.
Mm-hmm. Aaron said two things. He said it's redonkulously grounded. And then he said the rain hits us a millisecond later.
You know, yeah. I can tell the weather. I also want to talk about how quickly Marianne is rotating to her left.
Yeah.
And that's in part because of the way Matt's leading it, the style of the patterning from this point in time.
Yeah.
But she's leading it by looking back to her left, over her left shoulder.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. I remember when I was a baby Westie, and instead of does it swing, the argument was, do you look at your leader on two of your underarm, or do you look away from them on your underarm? Like, it was a thing. And I'm like, why are we so stressed out about this? Can we chill? Just a little bit. But that's one of the things you can do to help accelerate your timing is by leading with your head weight, because your head has a lot of weight to it, and you can use it to manipulate your balance and your grounding.
Yeah.
And that's why adding a spot to half of a rotation makes it a full rotation when you're learning to spin, because of the head weight.
It makes me think of the rotisserie chicken example.
Thank you, Phoenix Gray, for that beautiful term.
So, Aaron said, have you had dinner? Yeah. Okay, so I think the next thing I wanted to talk about is that this dance looks a little bit less controlled than a lot of the different styling that we have now. It's a little bit more bouncy, not like East Coast bouncy, but there's a looser quality to it than a lot of the very controlled movements that we use now.
And I would say that's in large part not necessarily because the basic technique is different, but just because they're dancing at higher speeds.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next, is that the music is different, and that also makes a big difference. And I think a lot of times nowadays, when we do get faster bluesy type music, we tend to continue with the technique that we use for slower, more contemporary music. And that is a little bit detrimental to your dancing. It makes it a lot harder on yourself. Like all of the weight changes, you can't have as many to easily move through a fast song. So yeah, it's really not so much that like the way that their technique is different. It's really about the song and the way that they are moving to it, because it is faster.
Yeah, and going back to what I said earlier about the trading places aspect, we're seeing a lot of that. They're just trading places throughout these patterns, and that's in part because of how fast the song is. It would be incredibly unreasonable to ask Marianne to go from one end of the slot to the other with Matt not going anywhere. That would be cruel and unusual. Even with a follow that's taller, that is still cruel and unusual, because then they're having to fight more momentum to redirect themselves.
This
And
is a partner dance.
Yeah. It takes two to, what's a T word for swing? Sorry,
I don't know.
It'll come to me later.
Triple. Aaron said triple.
It takes two to triple. I love it. It's going in my next script. All right. So one of the things I want to highlight, because we see this a lot with Marianne, but we also will see it with Deborah Szekely in the next video we're looking at tonight, is a fully extended arm for the follow. And that comes in part because of the higher speeds.
Yeah.
Because today we use a lot of, you can go check our old episode on elbow magic. We use this variability in the arm today to go from here to extended. Like there's time that goes in between those two positions, but under these circumstances, there is no time. So Marianne, as the follow, is being the constant variable. Her frame doesn't have as much change to it as a follow's frame does today.
Right.
However, faster songs, it should not change as much. But you can see in Matt that he is going from a bent elbow to a slightly less bent elbow while maintaining genius center counterpoint. If you were struggling to see center counterpoint in more contemporary, as in present day videos, go back and watch older videos, because the center counterpoint really was king for older West Coast swing. And it's still present today at the high levels. It's just, it can become more difficult to see because of the variety in which it's used now, because you can use it to do a lot of nuanced things.
Yes, I'm gonna let you talk for a minute because my screen went black.
Okay,
So
cool. I'm gonna talk about Marianne's anchor. So, for those of you who may be less familiar with Marianne Nunez, first of all, she is fabulous. I remember when I started, I wanted to be like the 6-foot Marianne Nunez. We'll see if that ever happens. I remember once she gave me like an excellent score in a Jack and Jill, and I just about had a heart attack. It was amazing. But she is the queen of footwork, and it just always amazes me how much she is able to do, even though she's so small. Like, she has this presence that just fills the room, and this movement that can be really impactful, in spite of how small of a person she is.
Right.
And I wanted to talk about this anchor right here. So she sits, or she grounds down into her right leg. Her left leg releases up. The pants are helping with this aesthetic because they're so flowy. They keep going after she finishes a movement. But notice how her left toe is actually slightly in front of her right toe. She's not traveling back here with her left foot, which is kind of the quote unquote basic nowadays. She's replacing underneath her and letting her hip swing back. So when her left heel is up, her left hip is forward. And when she lets that heel come down, her left hip comes back. And that is in part because of the speed of the song. Again, if she were to be traveling this way backwards onto the last step of her triple for her anchor, there would be that much more momentum to redirect back down the slot. And that's exhausting. And I know they could do that, but why? Why, dude, it's not necessary. Can you see us again, Alicia?
I can.
Excellent.
I want to add on to that one thing that we tend to focus on now is shaping. And it's interesting because there is shaping that we are seeing in the stance, but it is a very different kind of shaping. I think that it's more shaping as a partnership than as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think we focus on that a little bit more, shaping as an individual. And that's good. But it looks a little bit different in this context of this older dance.
Yeah. It's very much, and I think we talked about this on an episode Don't remember which episode it was. We got too many at this point. How a lot of the shaping is a direct result of the connection and the center counterpoint and the lateral tension in the handhold.
Right.
So like her lovely shape through here is following through with how he is leading across her.
Yep.
And then that press line he's doing is again just a natural result of having led her in that particular way. And then this is something that this is just like the prettiest frame, Marianne. You can see how she really dances and her legs come up into her ribs the way she dances. They don't stop at her hips. There's not a break there. The chain of cause and effect from the toe to the heel to the knee to the hip continues up into the ribs with Marianne. And incorporating that last bit of the chain, I know has been personally like revolutionary for my own dancing as I've been growing over the years. And this frame in particular, it just becomes so clear because you can see that really strong line up through her body.
Right. If there wasn't the connection between the lower and upper body there, it would look separate. Like the upper body would probably be more flat towards that, and the lower body would still be at that angle that it is at currently.
Yeah. So if you are watching this and have ever gotten the feedback that your body doesn't look like it's one piece, it looks like two separate pieces, it's probably because you're breaking yourself at the hips, regardless of leader or follower.
Erin said, how does one connect that line up the rib cage?
Obliques.
Yeah.
Thou shalt train with bicycle crunches.
It kind of depends. I think that there is a few different ways to go about it. Part of it is allowing the movement to settle all the way. So not just stopping it at the waist, but letting it continue naturally. Right. So a lot of times we keep our upper body kind of in one spot and we just move underneath ourselves. But rather than that, like if I were to take a step to the right and kind of sit into that hip, if I were not having that connected, my upper body would stay in the same area. But if I was, then the upper body is kind of following with the lower body. So you would have it kind of follow up on top of that right foot as you settle over it.
Right. What might be helpful is to think about, for those of you who are familiar with Apple Jacks and fancy feet, if you think of Robert Royston doing his fancy feet footwork, that is very disjointed. It's like it's hips down by design, because that's how that footwork works. And so if you compare that in your mind to the way Marianne is positioned here, the way you do fancy feet is to not let your hips affect your upper body. So you kind of brace your core against the movement that's happening below, and that's how it doesn't affect it. So in order to have it affect it, you need to unbrace yourself. It's very interesting how at the lower levels you tend to be taught engage your core, use your back muscles, and like, yes, but if you are in any sort of bracing in those muscles, it's going to hinder your ability to dance as a whole person.
Right.
It's going to cut off the chain of cause and effect.
And I want to add to that particular issue is something that you should work with a coach individually on, because there are a few different ways that you can have that disengaged. So, we could tell you how to do it for this particular way that you're doing it, but it might not be what you're actually doing. So it's best to work with an instructor for that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And an instructor will also be able to identify if you have any like body quirks that are also hindering you. So like if you've had any injuries or that kind of stuff, how to work around that and still get the effect you want without hurting yourself or straining the injury further.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, here, I'm gonna highlight this. So we see right here, Marianne's hips and shoulders are both facing the same direction, right?
Yep.
But as she swings through, her right hip goes a little bit farther, but you can see this, there's this like pull across this side of her body that's bringing her left shoulder through as well. And there's a bit of a delay to it. The hip comes first and it kind of pulls the shoulder behind it. The shoulder kind of lags behind it. So there's a timing delay in the cause and effect. You don't want to be moving as one piece at the same time. There needs to be a little bit of lag for it to feel natural.
I love the larger movements that's happening in his lead. And she is very nicely following through with that. So because he's using quite a lot of arm, not arm leading, but he is using quite a lot of arm in just the way that they're moving. She's following through with that. And like the way that she's moving her body is very kind of free in response to it. If you're getting that much movement, you also need to be moving.
Yep. And it's controlled. So even though the full range of motion from one side to side, so here's the beginning and here's the ending, somewhere around here, Matt is starting to absorb and resisted release that energy so it can stop and be redirected. He's not pushing all the way into the end range. He's absorbing and resisted releasing into the end range. And that's how they're able to dance at such fast speeds together. It's because he is like really quickly transitioning from encouraging movement in a certain direction to stopping the movement from that same direction.
I also wanted to mention that level change that they did with those, not swivels, but the little playing around here that we're doing. There's a lot of bend in the knees, and that is helping with the looser movement, which is what we talked about on our last episode of 2020.
Whoa. Yeah, it's now 2021.
Happy New Year, you guys.
Off to a strong start with yesterday. That's all I will say.
Yes, there are definitely ways that you can do that particular movement that will hurt your knee. And there are ways that are safe to do it. I want to point out, can you go back like just a tad? I just want to point out their arms, their hands are up above their elbows. And it's very free. We don't have any like tense arms. But then they use that to move away from it.
Yep.
A lot of times now we see that like U shape almost between the connection, which is great. But this is just a different way to do it. It's a different movement that it creates.
Yeah, and it also, so it encourages using compression to move into the anchor, because right through here, there's a push and then a catch instantaneously.
Yeah, double resistance.
Yep.
And that's something that isn't as frequently used, double resistance.
We want it to be.
Yeah. And that's that particular like peak of the hands is what you will see when you have double resistance. Because then it gives you that extra space to move away from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I want to freeze frame the moment where they're at max extension.
Mm-hmm.
And because they had so much room in both of their elbows, they're both only getting to a very minor pitch.
Mm-hmm.
My lines are horribly exaggerated. But a lot of what you see and it becomes problematic, is when people have fully extended arms.
Yeah.
And then they're like bending over like this.
Mm-hmm.
That's happening because this isn't happening first.
Right.
Looks like a green jack-o'-lantern.
Mm-hmm.
In editing the last few episodes, I'm like, wow, I don't draw as much as I used to. I need to fix that. So I've gone off the deep end. I apologize. I love how much he adjusts so that she feels comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
This, not comfortable. This, great. But that's how it should be.
It is. I want to add on to that, actually. The reason that it's so important for the lead to adjust to the follow is because the lead knows where they're going with things. The follow does not. Mm-hmm. So if you know that you're going to like get into a specific position, it's easier to make it safe and get into it safely. Whereas if you're the follow, it can be more dangerous if you don't have somebody adjusting when you're getting into, specific positions out of whatever you're doing.
Yeah. And then additionally, often in these kinds of patterns, the follow is the one traveling through the turns. Mm-hmm. And to ask a follow to travel not vertically while spinning, recipe for disaster. It's just not enjoyable in the slightest.
I love the little styling that she has at the end here.
So good. And the pulse, yo. But again, we see this extension that's mostly happening from Matt here. There's a little bit of rubber band in Marianne's arm, but more or less she is the constant, whereas Matt is the one doing more.
Yeah. That's actually something I want to note is in this particular dance, we're seeing Marianne kind of go from ending up in a little bit more extended position with the arm, but then she also has a lot of moments where she's ending up with her elbow in closer to her rib cage. And I wanted to point that out because in the next dance that we're looking at with Deborah, you won't see that. Mm-hmm. You will see a more extended arm the majority of the time.
Yep. And I want to talk about these preps. So because A, they are so close together, B, the song is so fast, and C, they're not intending for Marianne to travel through these preps. Mm-hmm. That's why she's crossing very much in front of herself for that one. Like she's not traveling very far at all. Mm-hmm. And that is something that obviously can still be done in the right context. However, our baseline has adjusted to having a more extended traveling that is less about the follow crossing in front of themselves, mm-hmm. and ends up being more just like this, but with shaping over. Do you like my diagrams?
It took me a second.
Mm, mm, mm. So this is the swimmy one. And this is just normal, like go directly in front. So this is what we have more of nowadays, whereas this is where it used to be as a baseline. But again, both are still valid.
Yeah.
It's just that one is more dominant now than it was. You can really see how he's leading her with his forearm across her ribs.
You just got very excited.
So good. Because so many people just try to lead with the hand and just no.
Aaron said, I'm sorry, what was the swimmy one?
Oh yeah. Let's go back to the scary ones. Okay. So this is the swimmy one over here, where the follow is, so we got left foot, right foot. The left foot goes across, and then the right foot goes across, and then the left foot goes across. This is why it looks swimmy. Whereas nowadays, oh, that's a much better drawing. Thank you for having me clarify, Aaron. Whereas nowadays, left foot, right foot, they just kind of stay on their respective ski track.
Mm-hmm.
Like it can get really narrow, but it doesn't do the weird swimmy thing as much. Like it's still an option.
Yeah.
But it's not the baseline anymore.
Yeah. We tend to work more with 2 tracks than 1 track.
Yeah.
Back to your excitement about this arm.
I was so excited. And so as he wraps her in, he lets her rib cage run into his right forearm. And then he drives forward from there. And you can see right there, he has hyperextended elbows, so it's really easy to see. He is pushing his forearm forward to release her from that. So we have a bend this way, and then we have a bend this way. Boink, 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 boink.
I also want to add that you can see that happening in the right side of his body as well. It's not just part of the arm.
Yes.
Because that is very important.
Yes.
You need both parts.
Yeah. But what tends to happen nowadays is the leader will take this hand and just go, oink! And no. Just no.
That creates something very different than what you want.
Yes. And actually, it's really interesting because follows have become so accustomed to that being led incorrectly that they lead themselves now.
Yeah.
So when I lead them correctly, they are so confused and they end up nowhere near where I expected them to. Because they were like, what? Because I'm leading them down the slot. But they're all like, I don't want my arm ripped off. So they do this weird like about face and keep going.
Yeah.
And I'm always a little alarmed. I'm like, oh, it's just because they're not used to this being led well. Okay, it's not me. It's fine. Take into account, adjust next time I lead it. Use less power next time.
And that's not to say that we have bad leads in the community. That's just to say that it's not something that is pointed out frequently when they are teaching that particular pattern.
Yeah, and that's one of the main reasons why we do this is because we want to point out the things that don't get talked about enough. Just by constraint of being a teacher live in a class, you only have so much time and you only have so much you can say. Like we all want to say everything, but we don't want your brains to explode.
Yeah.
we want you to come out of the class having learned something and made progress in your dancing. But that means inevitably we're always going to leave stuff out just because there's not enough time.
Right. And part of the reason that we do what we do here is because you can go back and rewatch us if there's something that you heard us say but didn't quite catch. Like you can go back, whereas if you're live in a class, not necessarily.
Yep. Oh man, how great would that be? It's like, remember that one thing so and so said on the Saturday afternoon workshop. at this event. Because you go and read your notes, and it's like,
Yeah.
the only thing in my written notes that makes sense are the jokes I wrote down that the teacher said. Yeah.
Aaron asked the forearm pop. I'm not sure what that question is.
Yes. We have discovered that Matt Auclair is slightly hypermobile because he got some hyperextension in his elbow right there. I can relate.
Was there another question that you had with that, Aaron?
Sorry, I was just referring to like to leading it properly, because it's like, because you guys mentioned like they don't do the forearm pop and instead they kind of like ripcord or something.
Yeah, so it's really common to, in this kind of situation, still treat the handhold as the dominant point of connection.
Mm-hmm.
However, as a nice golden rule, as a leader, if any part of your body is directly attached to either the follow's ribs or shoulders or hips, that's what you want to lead from. Mm-hmm. So this is one of those situations where you have a handhold, but it's not actually the best bang for your buck for the connection. Instead, it's the ribs on his forearm.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can see right here how there's this nice C shape that's allowing Marianne to really be nestled into not only his arm, but into his shoulder, his right shoulder, because that C curve continues across his torso. So it's a really nice pocket that she's in. And all he has to do is straighten out that curve to release her from that pocket.
Right.
Instead of doing anything where it's pulling the hand in any direction whatsoever.
Yeah. So if you lead it in the correct way, where you use all of the arm and the body, what's going to happen is you're going to lead your follow down the slot and rotationally. If you just do it with the hand, you're just going to lead rotationally. So she's just going to unwind in the like spot that she's in.
Bingo.
Therein.
Yeah. And it's when you do it this way, when you're kind of like popping them out of the elbow and shoulder pocket, instead you want to think of just leaving this hand quiet and letting it not go anywhere. Because the follow, when they're wound up this far, if the hand doesn't go anywhere, they're still going to end up way over here because of all of the rope they're wound up with.
Yeah.
So if you also travel the hand, this is another thing that tends to happen. The follow never reaches the end of the rope and they're like, can I stop now?
You must keep going.
Yeah. All right. So it is 7:45. Should we move on to the next video? Excellent.
Yes.
All right. All right. Our next video is Jason Colacino and Deborah Szekely. This one doesn't have as many pixels. We apologize.
Sorry, I tried.
You can only do so well with like 20-year-old YouTube videos, but please only watch the first song because we don't have time for both. Link is in the chat now. Give it a watch. And when you get back,
the same song.
I noticed that. It confused me for a second.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, is this the same dance? No, it's a different dance.
A different dance, but it's the same
song. Same partnership. It hurt a little bit.
Right.
All right. To the screen share. So already you can see how Deborah's baseline frame is very different from Marianne's. And although their baselines are very different, they maintain them throughout the dance. Whereas nowadays, having a much more variable frame is something that we aspire to. Yeah. So you can see right through here, like her free arm is just like locked in that shape. And Jason is actually doing a gentle wrist hook in order to make it really comfortable for her to have like a lateral connection into his hand. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the wrist hook situation, Jason's hand is just gently hooking underneath. And then Deborah's wrist is inside of it. These fingers do not make contact here. There's a gap. You don't want to squeeze. The other option, so there's like there's one pixel. There's one pixel right here. The other option is to do like a very gentle. So this is the wrist, a very gentle kind of pinch with like the thumb, and fingers.
Mm-hmm.
Super gentle, and the hooking tends to be with the thumb. But you're that looks like a demon. I drew a demon.
That was exactly what I was thinking.
It's appropriate. But long story short, whenever you are connecting with the follow's wrist, it's really important not to like iron cage them. They need to still be able to rotate their wrist freely without resistance, and need to be able to escape your grasp. And it's not because we're scared of you. It's because things happen.
Yeah.
And we just wanted our shoulders to maintain integrity.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Her swagger through these steps is just delicious. Another thing that you see from Deborah's technique, especially in her older videos, but you still see this in her technique today, is she really has a really strong drive forward onto her steps, where her center is arriving with the foot she's driving onto. So there is much less possibility for a delayed weight transfer, which is something that has become much more common and something we strive for in today's swing.
Yeah.
But just like the other techniques we've mentioned tonight, there is still a time and a place for this. It's just less common.
Right. And I love that Deborah is still very frequently in the community. Marianne kind of is sometimes, but you can really see how Deborah's technique hasn't really changed too terribly much. She still uses the same ideas that she has in this video. It still works.
Yep. And a lot of it comes from, like we were talking about with the connection in the previous video. As you can see right here, she's doing a similar anchor with her left foot that we saw Marianne do. So her left foot is actually a bit in front of her right with a strong bend, and this hip is slightly forward. So that way, when she drives down into the floor, into that foot, and pulls her left hip back, there's a lot of contrast between those two positions.
Yeah, hot tip. If you watch a lot of the pro follows, they will end with the left foot forward.
Yep.
You know how you're taught that left foot stays in the back. That's not what happens.
And the key is that happens more often than not, because once you ground into this right foot through the connection, you can tell you're already at the end of your rope. If you are already at the end of your rope on your 5 and on your right foot as a follow, that means you need to place your left foot underneath yourself in order to be grounded. Otherwise, you're going to end up too far pitched forward, bringing your left foot back.
Yeah. And it's also a technique that is intentional when you want to drag the right foot through on the one.
Oh, it's like my favorite thing to do. Like literally, it feels so good.
Yes.
Oh, especially when you just add like a little bit of extra tension, so that way the leader can accelerate you out of that anchor. Chef's kiss. Okay.
I think another thing I want to point out with Deborah is that, like I said, her technique hasn't changed all that much, but she herself looks different now. And so it looks a little bit different than this particular video. Like she's not really doing anything too terribly different, but it does look different. So if you go and watch any of her more current videos and, you know, you think it doesn't look the same as this,
Mhm.
it is, but it's just, it looks a little bit different on her now.
Yeah, and that's often because of the leading style that she is following has changed. So she's just applying the same technique in a slightly different situation in the connection, and that's the meaningful thing that has changed the most. He made that look so easy. I'm gonna try to steal that the next time I can dance with a human being.
At some point.
Yeah. So like we were talking about with Matt and how he was having more extension through his patterns, and he also had a lot more extreme pitch, which we didn't really have an opportunity to talk about because there's just so much to talk about. But we're seeing that here as well, where Jason has an extended arm and his pitch is quite extreme in order to counter Deborah's momentum and to redirect her effectively. And that's what's allowing him to take such a large step, because he was pitched so much to screen left and get out of her way to not murder her through this part.
Always the goal.
Always the goal. Never hurt your follow or I will come for you. I'm told I'm intimidating, so that should scare you? Question mark.
It's a very interesting little swivel. A lot more is happening in that connected hand than you might think. The way he has his hand on her hip, it's not very, what word do I want to use?
It's not driving the connection. It's more of a support.
Right.
Mechanism.
Yeah. It's
kind of like training wheels.
It's not solidly connected. There's not a lot of momentum and drive in it.
Yeah. It's actually, and this is just me conjecturing, but something, if I were leading in this situation, what that information in the left hand would be doing for me is like, I'm not leading with it, but it is telling me what Deborah's pulse is and where her weight is. So I'm not leading it. I'm just using it to read the situation. So that way I know when it's appropriate to start changing things up.
Right.
And actually, that brings me to a slight tangent. But those patterns that we have now, where as a follow, the leader just kind of like puts you in front of them with your back to them, they're behind you, and you're split weight, and you're like, huh? The best piece of advice is, as a follow, to continue changing weight on beat with the music, because a leader can lead a follow who is in motion.
Yeah.
Whereas if your follow has suddenly stopped transitioning weight and is split weight, and you're just stopped there, it's the leader's job to settle you onto one of those feet before leading you somewhere. And that can be, that's another skill to learn as a leader. So if you're with a leader who doesn't know how to do that, but it's much easier if you're moving through those, because then a leader can be like, not now, and so be the Energizer Bunny of rhythm and pulse.
That is one way to put it.
Yeah. Can you tell we have had a few weeks off and I missed this? Yeah, that's what's going on.
It's interesting. You can still see the like fairly deep settle that she has into that hip, even though it still looks more upright than a lot of the anchors that we see currently.
And it's because of where she's placing that left foot, like we were
Mhm.
talking about before. It's directly underneath her, which is allowing that settle. And she is really resisting his lead forward
Right.
with her left foot, with her left hip. Oh. My first time stumbling over my words tonight. Surprised I lasted an hour before that happened.
Another thing that I wanted to make note of is that in these older videos, you will see a lot more frequently where the feet are more pointing towards your partner rather than open.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives it a little bit of a different look. There's not as much of a stretching look because there's not that extra open from the rotation of the body.
And again, I believe that comes as a symptom of this faster songs because you just don't have the time to continue shaping open. All right. Another thing, basically, Jason Colacino makes everything look easy, but he's a master. So this alternating turn sequence, so good. Which is something we don't tend to see alternating turns like this very often anymore.
Yeah.
I know Robert Royston still has them in his repertoire pretty consistently.
I think Parker does occasionally.
Yeah.
Dancing.
But it involves like really intense like micromanagement of the follows traveling, so that way as a leader you're not giving them a concussion when you do your turn towards them,
right?
And you're also not interrupting the momentum of their turn. So it involves a really delicate kind of like give and take of the pulse through those turns.
Right. And it also requires a certain type of following. A lot of times now you'll see more that follows kind of are powering their own turns a little bit more. Where in this particular, you really have to roll off of each other to get it started and get the timing in sync.
And I really appreciate, like, just by nature of how close you have to be at the speed at which they're going, there's no way they could reach full extension on their anchor.
Right.
So they have to have an anchor variation that's different from what their anchors have been the rest of the dance so far.
Yep. And I love the choice that Deborah makes to come out of that.
Yeah, it was lovely.
Crossover and then rotates back the other way. Very dynamic.
Yeah. And that's something that is much more common today.
Yeah.
Like you see high level follows do that kind of anchor all the time now.
And it's fantastic.
It feels so good.
Do you want to quickly talk about the difference when he has that hip?
Yeah. So in this roll in, roll out. Okay.
Just because we talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
In a slightly different format.
Yeah. So this one, because of the nature of them both having much more extended arms and them both being taller, this one has more length and drive to the beginning. So Deborah has a lot more momentum through her turns, which means that coming into this section, Jason is actually using his fingertips to stop and slow down her forward momentum. And then he's bringing his arm to her. So whereas in the previous stance with Matt and Marianne, she was continuing to rotate back into that like elbow and shoulder pocket that Matt had set up. This time, instead of Deborah going to the pocket is coming to her. And There's the physics. And he's using the hand on her hip bone. So again, it's not the handhold that's creating this resisted release.
Mhm.
It is the fact that the handhold happens to be pressed against her right hip. And so he's using that to slow her down just a little bit. And then it's becoming a center counterpoint. And because she has momentum that has not been stopped,
Mhm.
it becomes a point from which she unfolds. So right here, he has slowed her into this step, so through this space. So it was a resisted release in his arm and through that minor weight transfer. And now he's not pulling this hand anywhere. He just needs to leave it where it is.
Yeah.
And she rolls out of it. And he only starts bringing it toward himself because he has transitioned the connection to her other hip.
Mhm. For a catch. Yeah.
Yeah. If he were to not have caught that hip and just was like yoink, Deborah would not have appreciated that. But because he has his hand already on her other hip, that's now the dominant point of connection. And therefore, the handhold becomes supplementary and can relax a little bit more. And then my favorite moment of this whole dance. Wait. No, it's not yet. I thought it was now. Damn it. Please hold. We will get there. I am determined to see it in slow motion before we call it a night.
I think it's right about here.
Okay, cool. Oh, yeah. It's
after the 500 spins.
After the 5 million turns. Yeah. Okay. Oh, man, she has a belt. You can see it like right there. It has been MIA because of
it's so clear.
Because there are 2 pixels. I love how this is the night I start using the branding, the podcast with pixels, and then I joke about there being no pixels. Oh, yeah, here it is. Strike a pose. See, Madonna. Yes,
it really does. It looks like that.
Yes,
it's fantastic.
And I want to highlight how Jason brought her into that position.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, this setup for a dip can become weight supported.
Yeah,
but it isn't innately weight supported.
Mm-hmm.
These are my favorite because I can actually do them and I can support my own weight. I feel like people have forgotten that this is a thing. I want this dip to come back, people. But the leader turns the follow until such a time as their right foot is kind of like in a triangle between and in front of the leader's feet. And then the follow can plie down onto their right leg and back bend as much as they so choose, or they can sit. But the real main detail I want to point out is how Jason is bringing his arm really uncomfortably into his own space.
Yeah.
So Deborah's can maintain the frame integrity that she's had throughout the whole dance. So she doesn't suddenly have to change drastically what her frame is doing. And this also has the added benefit of he's like placing her hand and her wrist on his hip or right leg above his hip. Again, not enough pixels, kind of hard to tell. But so that way she has something solid to brace against with that arm.
Yep.
And that's part of why she's able to stop so quickly, is because he offered that connection for her. And like, yes, he's supporting her here, but right. I feel like this is the one that had the dominant pressure to strike a pose.
Yes.
I will not break into song. I will not break into song. I think that's a good place to stop.
I agree.
Next week, we're just going to be analyzing one of Alicia's and my favorite spotlight dances from San Francisco Dance Sensation 2013. Michael Kilbasa and Melissa Roots. We just love that dance. And we want to analyze it. So that's what we're doing.
Yep.
Again, if you have any suggestions for videos you want us to analyze or topics you want us to cover in the future, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments below this video on YouTube or on any of our Facebook posts. And yeah, thank you all so much for joining us for our first episode of 2021.
We are in a new year and still doing this.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you all next week.
Night.
We took a couple weeks off and I'm like, what time are we starting? What time do I need to be ready?
I know. Oh, wait, it's Thursday. Thursdays mean something.
Yep.
Something happens on Thursdays that's important that I need to remember. Yeah.
And I'm supposed to say something else. Oh. So.
Are you unmuted, Alicia? Because I can't hear you. If you
I
are
hadn't
talking.
said anything because
Okay,
you were
good.
talking.
Wow. I think what's happening is your new mic is so nice, there is no background noise. So I'm like, wait, I am in a vacuum by myself.
I have disappeared. You are on your own.
Okay,
Sorry.
cool. You're here. It's all good. All right.
I think my favorite part of that is the very aggressive thigh grab.
Oh, yeah. Thigh grab. For me, it's the plies. Because I'm like, that was a pattern. That was a thing they did. Very aggressive side pass plies. Which I want to, like, when we have Royston on Sunday, I'll be like, Royston, explain this to me. Where did that particular thing come from? Because I'm glad it's dead. Personally, my knees couldn't take that.
What was it that who was it that you compared Deborah to? Was it Madonna?
Yes. Doesn't she looks like early 1990s Madonna, I swear.
Yeah, I see.
And I'm super okay with it.
It's the very blonde hair.
Yeah. And the like, come at me, bro, attitude. It's fantastic.
Yes, I want to preface this whole dance with saying her attitude really makes it.
So good.